Today, we are doing something different. We are having a Facebook Live with Jessica Vanderhook. Stumbling already, we're just getting started.
You know what? You're doing a better job than most people.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, Tango Romeo is the trauma recovery podcast. We help pave a path for trauma recovery. Part of that is all the different ways to do that, to cope and to heal. And let's start with your service and who you are. Thank goodness we have a paramedic voice on the show, because this is very Army heavy, because that's my sphere and that's my world. But I'm doing my best to balance that out with a paramedic voice. So let's start with your service. When did you start as a paramedic? What did that road look like?
So I started in EMS in 1998, actually, as a volunteer firefighter. And I went on to EMR and EMT school, worked for a couple years in northern Saskatchewan, and then came back to Alberta and got my paramedic. So it's been 19 years working on the ambulance.
Northern Saskatchewan seems like an interesting place to be. I'd imagine the native reserves and whatnot was where you got called out to a lot.
Yeah, there were 5 Cree Nations around the towns that I worked, and there were also several, probably 5 or 6 small towns that we serviced as well. So our coverage area was huge, and our transport times were super lengthy, and our scope of practice was pretty small. So you can imagine essentially doing first aid on a cardiac arrest victim for an hour. Like, there's no survivability in that scenario, but it was what we had to do. So it was a pretty steep learning curve, if you will. There was a lot of trauma out there, and being small town and being so far away, when you hurt yourself, you did a good job.
Right.
So it wasn't uncommon for us to have to transport people into Saskatoon on really bad roads and in big storms and stuff like that.
Farm accidents were a thing.
Farm accidents, car accidents, snowmobile accidents, and then just the regular unfortunate trauma that ends up being associated with poverty, which usually goes hand in hand with alcoholism. So that sort of stuff too, fights and that kind of thing.
When you came to our urban area, was it Calgary was the first big city?
Yeah, actually it was. So I went from Saskatchewan to Drayton Valley and Breton, and then from there I went out to Siksika, which was an amazing place to work. They have a great service. And then from there I came into Calgary, and that was 15 years ago now. So that was actually the first city that I'd ever worked in.
What was the biggest difference for you between rural and urban?
Rural, you were completely on your own. Backup isn't guaranteed, and your scope of practice is a bit bigger out there because you're further away from the hospital. So there's more medications that you're responsible for giving and more procedures that you're responsible for doing. So I think just the feeling of aloneness out there and knowing that you can't really call for help. Whereas in Calgary, if I have a big call, I have a really sick patient, I can call for another ambulance to come back me up.
Now, let's talk about mechanism of injury for PTSD. All those years, all of those scenes, all of those calls is cumulative.
Yes.
People get confused sometimes about PTSD. They think it's just an Army thing from people that have been in a war. But the mechanism of injury is irrelevant. Whether it was
absolutely.
And like for myself, I only have 1 tour. I know people with 8 tours, for goodness sakes. But 1 tour, 6 months of super intense, not all the time, of course, there was lots of downtime, but there was enough intensity that I've been suffering ever since. Now, that's just the mechanism of injury, though.
Yeah.
So for paramedics, and we don't do war porn here, so we don't tell any of the gruesome stories.
Yeah.
There's no point.
Yeah, I agree.
It's all about the symptoms and how to deal with that and the coping and the healing. So for mechanism of injury for yourself, it was death by 1,000 cuts.
That's exactly what I call it, death by 1,000 paper cuts. If the stars had aligned and all I was dealing with was traumatic calls, and we had a healthy work environment, and we worked hours that were, good for you. We worked, if we were given breaks, if we were allowed to look after ourselves, if our work-life balance was good, your resiliency is a lot more than when you're being chipped away by a bunch of different things, right? So when you're dealing with all of these calls and people's trauma, but yet you're overworked and you're exhausted and you haven't been sleeping because you have insomnia, and you worked a 14-hour day the day before, and you haven't eaten, and you haven't been able to use the washroom, and it's the, fifth or sixth time that day someone's tried to pick a fight with you. And so it's all these little things that take away your ability to be resilient in the times that you really need it, which are those calls, those big calls where they're emotionally intense and there's a lot of things going on.
It's like you're fighting a battle on two different fronts.
Absolutely, you are. And I think a lot of people would agree with me. It's the way that they're being treated and the way things are being handled that is just as traumatizing, if not more traumatizing, than the actual things that we witness.
That's part of why your story resonated with me as much as it did when we met at the peer support conference.
Mm-hmm.
Our tour in Roto 4 in Croatia, it wasn't the bombs and the bullets so much. Like there was that,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't a lot of it. What it was is how we were treated by our own people. And that's where the anger, for some reason, just sticks with you. And and has some, it just is a force amplifier. But now they've done empirical studies about exactly that. The mechanism is called moral injury. And the moral injury from your leadership, from your work environment, the people that are supposed to have your back and you're supposed to be able to trust, and then they don't have your back. They undermine you. They do the exact opposite of having your back.
Yeah. That
That is a force amplifier for PTSD to a factor of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you're talking about.
Oh, 100%. For myself, it was a huge lack of support from my employer. It was also having a partner that didn't have my back. So it was a real combination of a bunch of things. And then, you'll hear paramedics refer to themselves as black clouds. And that just means that we attract a lot of, really intense calls, lots of trauma calls, lots of cardiac arrest, that type of thing. And that was me.
You were the shit magnet.
I was the shit magnet. I was doing CPR on people at least twice in every 4 days. I was dealing with high acuity, very sick people on a constant basis, and then being asked to mentor people. So I would have a student or I'd have a new employee. And oftentimes, because of my ability to figure people out, these were people that were already struggling and had been brought to me specifically because they were having issues elsewhere with other people. And it was my job to figure out what was going on with them and help them be successful. And while I'm doing that, I'm dealing with a partner that I don't even know what's going on. I just know that we can no longer work together. And then I'm dealing with all of these really crazy calls. So it was just like, there was no break. There was no break from it. And I would go home after 4 days 4 days at work, and I'd sleep for 4 days because it was all I could do.
How has the conversation been in the paramedic world when it comes to mental health and PTSD? Is it becoming more out of the shadows, or are people able to talk about it now?
Very much. When I booked off in 2011, WCB did not cover PTSD. And when I actually came back to work, I asked for a modified work schedule, and I was told that PTSD is not a legitimate health concern and does not require a modified work schedule.
Wow.
That was 2012. I like to think that a lot of progress has been made. I can't speak for what's being done at work, but I can tell you that the conversation that I can have with my coworkers is a completely different one than the one that didn't exist at all in 2011. So we've gone from not talking about it to being a much more understanding, much more compassionate and caring group of people about each other. And I know that when I sit down and I'm having a rough day, I can tell my partner, whoever it is, and just explain it to them. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to get a very compassionate response in the form of, you know what, if you're having a bad day, I got you.
There's a program now with EMS, a friend of mine that I actually went to junior high with 1 million years ago, or maybe might have been 2 million. But he was a paramedic for 16 years, and now he is working in the world of exposure therapy to get paramedics who are off work for PTSD back to work.
Yes.
Ryan, what the hell was his last name? Can't
Collier.
remember right now. Ryan Collier.
Yes. So him and Troy Miller, God bless their souls, those two. We now have a return to work program, which I've heard a lot of really great things about. I think the two of them, from what I understand, I haven't dealt with them myself other than, as coworkers, but I didn't get a reintegration back to work when I came back. And mine was a very interesting and painful and probably illegal experience. But from what I've heard, they're doing a really amazing job, that they are putting their heart and soul into making sure that people's experience coming back to work is as positive and as healing as it possibly can be. And they're trying to set people up for success. So, I mean, kudos to them. That right there is a huge leap from what we had. Because when I came back to work, I got told you can either staple papers together or you can go back to work full time. It's up to you. And I actually had the lady in charge look me right in the eyes and say, but you're not going to go back on the ambulance full time because we wouldn't want you to go crazy again or anything.
Holy shit.
She actually, that's the part that I'm saying is probably illegal. I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to talk to your employees like that.
I'm pretty sure that's,
Yeah.
And if it's not, it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's talk about force amplifying the sense of betrayal and the indifference. The indifference, the suck it up buttercup mentality.
So on top of being told my PTSD was not legitimate, I was also called crazy. And this wasn't in a private office with her. This was actually in an office full of other people.
So you were admonished in front of others, which is pretty much the worst thing you can do, and is something that anybody who's halfway to any kind of a leader would never do in 1,000 years.
No, there's probably 20 people in that, because it was like a wide open area where all the people had their cubicles. And I just remember thinking like, wow, I can't imagine what's happened to you in your life that you can be that cruel to another human being that's coming to you and asking for help. Because that was what I had gone to her for, was to start the conversation about going back to work on a modified schedule.
Instead, you got a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, I sure did.
So about how long ago did you get a diagnosis of PTSD?
So it was, I believe, it was either the fall of 2011 or it was the spring of 2012.
Okay. Now, at that time, what was there a specific incident, or what was the aha moment where you knew that you needed help?
Yeah, so it was, like you said, it was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it was going to a particular call where the lady didn't need an ambulance, but she really needed emotional support. She was getting some very bad news, and she was 7 months pregnant, and nobody else around could offer her anything. I was basically, without getting into too much detail, was just left completely abandoned by everybody and left to pick up the pieces with this poor lady. And I remember thinking to myself, I feel so bad for her that she gets me today, because I'm so burnt out and I'm so incapable of feeling any type of anything for myself, let alone anybody else. Like, I knew something was wrong. And I felt bad for her that she got me that night. And like I said, she didn't need any medical treatment. What she needed was a whole bunch of compassion and empathy that I was just completely incapable of. And I did my very best for her, because God, my heart went out to her that night. But it was the call after that that I realized something was really wrong. Well, when I spoke at the conference there, this drug addict had been stabbed, and he looked at me in the ambulance, and he's laying on the stretcher, and he looked at me and he goes, "Are you okay?" And he was serious about it. Like, he was genuinely concerned for my state of being. And for somebody to be in a, death or life situation, to recognize that there was something that wrong with me, I was like, oh God, here, this is it. And I could actually feel my psyche fracture. I could actually feel it go. I could actually feel something pop in my head. And I was like, well, this is it.
When the hero is the patient, and the patient could see it.
Yeah. Right. And then the cops that were with us for continuity were like, do you need to talk to somebody tonight? I remember thinking like, yeah, I probably shouldn't even be here. I need to go home. And I did. I went home and I didn't come back for a year.
For a year?
Yeah. Yeah, I was off for a year.
On the road to recovery, what did you do right and what did you do wrong? What worked and what didn't for you?
So drinking a whole bunch of alcohol did not work.
Why not?
Well, being a CNS depressant and being an emotional depressant. I mean, I guess in a way it served a purpose. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It took the sharp edges off of my life, and it allowed me the misbelief that I could connect with other people when I was feeling so lonely. But none of those things were true. It didn't take the sharp edges off. It just blinded me from them for a little bit. And
it only makes it worse.
It does. And then trying to attempt to have any kind of relationship. Like, I ended up going through a divorce. And then trying to get back into the dating world, it was a horrible idea. I should have just been single that whole time and just focused on myself. So that just reiterated the negative experiences that I was already having in my life. So those things I wouldn't recommend doing to anybody. The things that I did do right were I sought help from my doctor right away. And he referred me to a great psychologist who's still my psychologist to this day. And he was able to help me start becoming self-aware, which is the key to healing. You have to understand yourself in order to really start processing the things that continue to haunt you in your life and the ways that are going to work for you to fix them. If you don't know yourself, you can't heal yourself.
One of the reasons that is one of the reasons that PTSD goes typically undiagnosed for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. I was undiagnosed for about 22 years, and that's normal.
Yeah, I heard it is normal for it to go for years undiagnosed.
There's people who've gone 30, 40 years, and at some point it hits a breaking point, and you find out the hard way, as they say.
Well, and these are the things that I tell people now, is that you're going to pay interest on these things if you don't handle them at the time they happen. So you either pay now in the form of taking the time to process things, and that means being present and mindful about the experience you went through, and then seeking the appropriate help, or you're going to pay compound interest on that sucker down the road. And
you're living on borrowed time, and you will be paying interest. Yep. That's brilliant. I'm going to repeat that now at our peer support group. Good. I'm going to, do I owe you a quarter every time I say it?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. So on your road, you eventually got to the point where you had the strength to decide, I found something that helps and I'm going to share it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So I actually started Prairie Sky Equine Assisted Therapy before my diagnosis.
Okay.
And part of why I started it was because I realized that my field of vision was becoming quite negative. I had very negative us versus them against society, because we just see the worst of people. And it's really easy to become jaded and clouded in that. But the only person that suffers for that is you. So
I see it with cops all the time. They expect the worst. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was dealing with somebody who claims to be, and I have no reason to believe he's not, United States Marine Corps veteran in Dallas. And he's homeless, living in a van, has 56 cents to his name, something like that. So I'm doing everything I can from this end. I tried to send him $50, and then the e-transfer doesn't work between countries. Like, oh, great. Yep. Just when he has a glimmer of hope, it doesn't happen. So I called Veterans Affairs down there, and I hooked him up with all kinds of resources. So luckily he's in Texas, and there's no better place to be a veteran in the United States than Texas. They take pretty good care of you. But what was my point? What were we talking about just before I went down that hole? So a cop friend of mine, I asked for help, and he's like, oh, he's probably a faker, don't get sucked in. And it's like, no, man, no. But that's the cop side of them.
And there's a reason for that. It's because that is all we see.
Yeah.
And so you start to believe that that's the entire population. And then when you're not at work and you're driving and you see the way people treat each other, and you're just like, it just solidifies these negative views that you have of society and the world. And it's a rabbit hole to go down. And like I said, the only person that suffers for that is you.
When every single day you are wading in the worst of humanity, you're seeing the worst and getting stained by it.
Yeah.
How do you counterbalance that? How do you wash yourself clean?
Well, it's what you do when you're not at work, I think, that allows you to not get sucked down that rabbit hole. And that's basically why I created Prairie Sky. I mean, there's lots of reasons why I created Prairie Sky, but the big one was I wanted to change what I was seeing. I wanted to actively take charge of the way that I saw society by creating a place that people could come to where they could get the services they need, they could get equine therapy, and they could walk into a place where they knew they were valued and loved, and that people came and felt better when they left. They were happy when they were there. There was a sense of community, a sense of peace. And I thought, you know what, if I can't see this in my regular day-to-day, I'm going to create a place like that.
It's being fairly well accepted in society now that service dogs are actually a thing and that they're helpful. My dog's on my hip right here.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not a service dog. She's a dog tails dog. And she puts kids at ease just by simply being there. So they can read, because you can't practice your reading out loud if you're all nervous.
Yeah.
So having a dog tails dog is helpful. Having service dogs are good for panic attacks. So why horses?
Well, there's a lot of really cool things that happen to the human body and the human psyche when they're around horses. So the first thing is when we go through a lot of trauma, we start to live in the amygdala part of our brain, which is the fight or flight. It's great if you're in fight or flight. It's not great for building a life from that point. And a lot of us get stuck in there and it's really hard to get out. You see everything as a threat, everything is fight or flight.
And that's why the nonstop nightmares, which is my personal bit of fun.
And the constant thoughts.
Because the amygdala never settles down.
It doesn't. And it secretes cortisol. And cortisol in the right doses for the right reason prevent you from being killed. But over long term, it creates a lot of unintended or not unintended, unwanted side effects like anxiety, insomnia, fatigue. You start to put on weight, all of these awesome things that also come along with depression. So
intrusive thoughts.
Yep, intrusive thoughts. And so the great thing about horses is they actually take you out of your amygdala and bring you back into the frontal part of your brain, and more specifically, the right part of your brain. And so that does a couple of things. One, your frontal lobe is much more appropriate to process complex emotions and thoughts. When you're in your amygdala all the time, it's very difficult because it's not meant to process complex emotions and thoughts. That's never what it was for. And so it's very difficult to start healing from that part of your brain. Whereas if you're in the frontal part of your brain, you're actually able to start processing the complex emotions and thoughts that you need to process in order to heal. So that's one aspect of it. It changes the part of your brain that you are functioning in. And the other part is that rather than secreting that cortisol, you start to secrete chemicals and hormones that are associated with love and acceptance and attachment, which are extremely important for healing. So oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, those types of things. So physiologically, your body starts to operate completely differently. And that's without doing anything. That's just being near them. And that's part of why therapy dogs are so beneficial. It physiologically changes the way your body operates and puts you into a place where you can start to do the healing work. And then from there, horses also have a very powerful electromagnetic field. Now, we all do. All living things do. And it's why you can feel that there's been a fight in the room when you walk in and two people are standing there. I mean, their body language says
cut the tension with a knife.
Exactly. And that's
everybody's a little bit psychic, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And so when we step into their electromagnetic field, we actually sync with theirs because theirs is bigger and stronger than ours. So what that means for us is our pulse drops, our blood pressure drops, our respiratory rate drops, and we're able to just sort of level out a bit. So those are two of the amazing things. And then the other thing that's so important is that horses are incredibly intelligent and very intuitive. And because of the way they operate without ego. So what they present to us is what we are showing them. And what they do is they provide a mirror to our state of being and to the way that we're existing. And what that does is that provides us with that self-awareness that we need to be able to heal. And the reason self-awareness is so important is because when you become aware of your own reactions to things that are going on, because that's part of the problem, right?
It's a huge part of the problem. You have no idea that you're an asshole.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. I was such a shithead before I got better. I was awful. I was mean. I was angry. I was a bully. My answer for everything was, well, I'll just punch you in the face. Like that was my go-to for everything. I was not a nice person when I wasn't well.
A friend of mine that like since high school kind of friend of mine saw the before and after of the army. And he says, man, you got so mean. And people that have never seen that side of me, they can't believe it. It's like, but Mark, you're so kind and compassionate and loving and caring. Yeah, I'm also vicious. In the wrong circumstances.
Yeah. And it needs to be antagonized for sure, but it was almost like I'd slip into this whole other personality when I was at work. And I used to call her paramedic Jess.
Oh boy. Well, it's good. In one way, though, it's good because you split it. Like, this is my life here. This is my life there. When I was a soldier, I remember talking with a friend about that, and he had still has, never got divorced. So still with the same person.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
That's impressive.
It's impressive. But he's like, no, I'm different at home than I am here. And I make a line, and it's like there's two me's.
Yeah.
And I have to be a split personality, and that's how you survive. And if you have a strong enough home life, it kind of balances you out.
Well, and that's just it. And that's such a huge part, kind of when I was referring to, how do you not get into that rabbit hole of believing that everything's awful? It's what you do when you're outside of work.
It's also thrilling, though.
What's that?
The awful is awesome.
Well, it brings out the best in us. Like, let's be totally honest. When I feel like I'm functioning the best is when I'm dealing with like a huge trauma.
When it's hitting the fan.
Yeah. And that's when I really feel like I'm functioning at my optimal. I'm making quick choices. I'm navigating all kinds of things. I'm looking at logistics.
Good.
It does, because I'm like, wow, look at me, and not from a ego point, but it just
feels good.
Yeah. It's an
euphoric.
observation. I'm like, I really function really well in this state.
5 years ago, we were in Paris, and that's where we got married. It's a remarriage, obviously. And there was a great big parade, borderline riot. It was pro-Hamas, anti-Israel parade. So it was pretty heated.
Ooh.
Well, my wife was just pooping her pants, and so were all the French cops, because they're French. And sorry, it's funny though, because they were so terrified. And I was having a ball. I was walking. I said, "Okay, you stand there by the wall. I'm going to go have me some fun." I'm taking selfies with the people and taking pictures, and keeping my eyes on the cops, because they were just shaking in their boots, because it was obvious it could go the wrong way very easily.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a hoot. It was so fun, and had it gone absolutely nuclear, great.
You would have been fine.
I would have been fine. I would have been enjoying the show and finding an escape route and taking it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing what we get comfortable with and where we feel like we excel. Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually.
Yeah, the horrible is, I call it embrace the suck. The horrible is the great. It's both things at the same time.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Both.
It is both. And I think part of feeling like you've done a really great job and you're firing on all cylinders actually takes away some of the crappiness that you're actually dealing with, because you're so focused on doing your job and doing a good job that you're not really paying attention. People say to me all the time, well, how do you deal with all the things you see and all the trauma and how bad it is? And I'm like, do you know that you're just too busy doing your job to really sit and look at, like, deeply at big wounds or any of that stuff? You're just so busy doing your job and trying to do a really good job, because lives matter and depend on it.
I think it's one of the reasons that something like being in a war, it might not settle in for 20, 25 years. Because when you're in it, and exactly what we're talking about, there's the good side of it. There's the rush side of it, where, okay, everybody else is panicking and I am switched on.
Exactly.
Like you feel like a superhero, because you kind of are.
Yeah, it's the same thing we go through, but to a much, in somebody's house or a car accident.
It is the same. It is the same. It's not more or less. It is absolutely the same. But when everybody else is in a flap and you are calm, cool, and switched on, and everything that's going on, you're hyper vigilant. It's a good feeling.
It is.
Until you can't shut it off.
Yeah, or until you get bogged down in dealing with all of the other things that you end up getting called for, right? All the social working aspect of our job is
Or your
huge.
personal life starts going sideways.
That, right?
Then the pile gets higher and higher and heavier and heavier.
When you're not supported at home, it's a very difficult job to do. My ex and I are still friends, and I love him dearly, and I wish him nothing but the best. But I wasn't supported at home. And he didn't know how, and I didn't know how to ask for it. So I'm not blaming him for that. There was two people in that party. But it definitely made things a lot more difficult. And I've also noticed this too, because I have these conversations with my male counterparts at work. And I say, I wonder if it's different for you and I, because you go home to a wife who's already different in the way women are different in the way that they approach how
Tend to be
people
more
are feeling.
nurturing and caring.
Exactly. There's more of the mothering, there's more of the nurturing, there's more of the how was your day? What can I get you? And I'm not saying that that happens in every home. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to generalize, but you're more likely to get that type of response when you go home to a woman, whereas I go home to a man and he's busy watching the hockey game. And I'm like, I've had it up to my eyeballs. I've worked a 13-hour day. The house is a mess. There's no dinner on the stove. And he says to me, well, what are you making for dinner tonight? And I'm like, well, I've been waiting all day to punch someone, and I guess you're right. Don't get me wrong. I don't condone domestic violence, but the thought went through my head so many times. And I just remember thinking like, God, what I wouldn't give to just get a hug when I walked in the friggin' door and just have somebody look after me when I come home. That would have just made such a huge difference. But I also never asked for it because I didn't know I needed it, because I wasn't self-aware enough to know what I needed to heal.
For those that are listening that are ready to try something new, that
Yes.
have heard about equine therapy but just haven't taken that step, how can they get a hold of you, and what does it look like?
So what it looks like right now, and this could change a little bit, but we are going to be doing 6 evenings spread out over 3 weeks. And each night has a focus on different aspects of self-awareness, because like I was alluding to, that self-awareness is key, because once we become self-aware, we can actually change our response to our triggers, because that's what re-traumatizes us. There's the original trauma, whatever that might have been, and then there's the triggers that continue to get us, whether it's the way people talk to us, whether it's, everybody has different things. And we become re-victimized every time we get flared up in reaction to these things. And so becoming self-aware allows us to change the way we respond. And so throughout those nights, we work on those types of things, creating self-awareness, learning where your energy's at. Because one of the things that I mentioned that is so important, so key for understanding, is that my belief is the injury that we have is a soul injury, or a moral injury, or a heart injury, whatever you want to call it. And the secondary side of injury is the brain. And the great thing about the horses is they work on healing our soul. And because of the physiological response we have to them, with all the neurotransmitters, the chemicals, the hormones, the way we change our brain function, that actually allows us to have more of a soul or heart experience. And that allows that healing to begin. We shut down the left part of our brain and we let the right part of our brain, which is the experiential part, where we're fully present in the moment. And that actually starts the healing process. And that's actually a very spiritual experience. When you start bonding with this 1,200-pound animal and you realize that it wants to be with you and it accepts you. It doesn't matter how angry you show up. It doesn't matter how flawed you think you are. I mean, I don't know about you, but I had a very hard time being around other people because I just felt so mean and nasty. But I wanted to be able to just be that way without being judged, like what if I walked into a place and I really just let it rip and I just showed people what was really going on in my head, and the thing about horses is they're going to accept you regardless of what state you show up in.
Well, it's one of the reasons peer support groups are so important,
Yeah.
especially if they have what Ryan Collier calls cultural competence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's nothing but crossover between military and first responder, but maybe a first responder peer support group is the best. And that's what Tango Romeo is about too, to hear a familiar voice that gets it, that has been there, done that, got the t-shirt kind of thing. And that way you can go, oh, I'm not the only idiot out there.
Yeah, I'm not the only one experiencing these things, because so many people think they're the only ones. And that's isolating and alienating, because you think it's you that's
and it's also
broken.
and we'll say it again and again and again, it's not a weakness.
Not at all.
It is not an illness.
No.
It's an injury.
It's an injury which you can heal from.
And it's a legitimate injury. Like we're talking like an MRI machine can see it kind of injury.
Absolutely. So there's no question that the brain is affected by PTSD. There's no question that it includes a brain injury. But I think the brain injury is caused by the fact that you have such a shift on a soul level to the injury, or a heart level. And part of what's great about the program is you are with your peers. When you walk in the door, you're greeted by one of your peers, somebody that's been through what you've been through.
So how can somebody learn more about what you do? What's your website?
So our website is www.pseat.ca. So pseat.ca. And you can also email us at info@pseat.ca.
PSEAT stands for Prairie Sky Equine Assisted Therapy.
You got it.
I got it.
You got it.
All right. Jessica, thank you so much for what you do and for the people that you help. What you do matters and your service matters.
Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here.
My pleasure. You're listening to Operation Tango Romeo.